Hey everyone, Calais Stockstill, my ALF Training, Diane Barnard. Thank you. Diane, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Good. We're quarantined somewhat, so I'm being productive making training.
Me too. Me too.
Today we're going to talk about cultural competency in
Yep.
long-term care.
Okay.
And I'm going to share the screen with you.
All righty.
There you go. So this is definitely an important subject.
It is.
Long-term care is a very diverse population of seniors, becoming a more of a melting pot, and also employees.
Correct. And I do think, I mean, there are some things like cultural competence and sensitivity. It's a big, it's very important in healthcare all around because we are, like you said, a melting pot. But as people age out, there's also layered kind of nuanced differences that complicate it a little bit. People that maybe are forgetful, they don't really have, they're more fearful, they're perhaps separated from their family and loved ones who once could interpret for them. So the cultural competency is necessary and sensitivity all through healthcare, but there are particular needs of the elderly for both the staff that work there and the patients or the consumers that live there.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you want to.
Yep.
Okay, so what we'd like to talk about in this next hour is of course, we will define culture. What is a culture? We all think that we know what our culture is, but what does that mean for human beings in general? And then when we understand what culture is, then we understand what diversity is, and that's one of our goals for this. And then, of course, we're going to understand diversity in context of the long-term care environment, which is for the population that we serve. And our goal is to assist everyone living and working. And the key words there, of course, are living and working. Even though we're very patient focused, we also want to embrace the cultural diversity of our community so that we can provide for them, because people are better when people like their jobs, they want to stay in their jobs, they feel supported in their jobs. And so it's actually a two-way street. How can we improve the cultural diversity of our patients, our consumers, and the people that take care of them?
Yeah, and it is like a home away from home in a way, work. I mean,
yes.
So we want it to be as welcoming and understanding as possible.
And we'd like to broaden that umbrella, just not only to the residents and the staff, but to the families that come to visit in the facility. Because when we improve facility, the cultural competence of the facility, it does many things. It enhances the reputation of the facility. It improves the customer resident experience. It makes staff want to stay longer. And overall, when people understand each other or agree to understand, there is less abuse, less neglect, less frustration, less of all the negatives are reduced significantly when there's a willingness to not only learn about other cultures, but to allow them to have a space in your community.
Yep. And so I think, did you touch on 4, identify the benefits?
Yes.
Yep, that's it, okay.
Oh, no, wait, yeah, I did.
Yep. You just mentioned some great benefits.
So really, as we age out, the population of our older adults will be more diverse, and of course that makes sense. But really, what does diversity mean? We have the population of lesbian, gay, and we had touched upon that in the previous training. Some people not actually, they might not even have come out in that situation.
Right.
We also have to establish kind of like a place for people to feel safe, number one. We'll have more lesbian, gay, transgender. We will have more ethnic diversities, cultural differences. This is a melting pot, like you said. Sometimes we have to be very aware, if it is a certain population, that the minorities that exist within those cultures, if it's like primarily, let's say, an Asian culture or primarily Spanish culture or Irish culture, then perhaps another culture might be overshadowed by that. So we have to make sure that everyone in there, that we address the cultural needs of that person, not just the large predominant culture. So that's another thing we think about. We can be very culturally competent in one area with one culture and absolutely not approachable, not user-friendly to another in our very own organizations.
Right, yeah. So companies must keep up with the change because it's ever changing, even though
Yes.
you think something's one way. It's always fluid, right?
Yes, yes. Yeah.
And so many facilities already do have a diverse population. And like you said, there could be a facility in a certain part of town, like I'll just say like Miami, and it's got a heavy concentration of a particular ethnic group. But
Right.
the workforce that comes in is diverse, and you're going to have to address this.
And I also think that, when it's so important to address the cultural needs, even if you're respectful, even if you're do everything right, for that person that might have lived a very culturally rich life, if they're moved to assisted living, they've lost a lot of their own ability to have control over the decision making and what happens in their life. So a facility that really takes the time to provide like culturally, like different ethnic speakers, hire different ethnic individuals.
Food,
maybe
it's all going to be
food, right? They could have like one night a week is something, and it actually helps everyone to be more inclusive, and that's really what we're going for.
Yep. So understanding the change and neglecting to understand diversity in resident and staff populations can contribute to conflicts, misunderstandings, and potential hostility that may indirectly affect residents' quality of life and care.
Yes. So sometimes I think like our culture is our code. I think that we're all kind of, we're not computers, but we're coded a certain way from birth. And we do that to learn how to negotiate our environment. For example, we're speaking English. I understand you, you understand me, because that's our code. That's the code. Maybe I know a couple Spanish words or French, but I'm not fluent in that. It's a little more difficult for me to negotiate or understand. And a lot of the things that we communicate are verbal, but I think that, and very few people would not realize that a lot of communication is nonverbal. And so the way that you present to somebody or not present to somebody speaks volumes as well. For example, just a couple different, like West Indian cultures, they speak in very loud voices. That's the way they talk. And Asian caregivers that might be working in your facility, well, they're very respectful with the quiet, and they're very more subdued. So when you have that clash of cultures, there could be, why is he yelling at me? I don't understand why he's yelling at me. So that's where cultural competence, because we all as healthcare providers think that we're going to come in there and we're going to be the best and everyone's going to love us. I mean, I think most people I know, but it's very easy to misunderstand. But when the facility, the workers, not so much the residents, because it's the onus is on us really to help promote that change. But when we're really saying, well, this is a cultural thing, and we triage our own feelings, we're better off, we're not as upset, we're not losing staff thinking people are yelling at them. Like Middle Eastern families are very protective of women. Certain cultures are very, like we always talk about the British and their stiff upper lip. I don't know if that's true or not, but they are a little more reserved. So maybe somebody that comes in, we just have to be so aware of the coding, how they have been raised, because if not, misunderstandings will occur, and hostility is just a natural segue from misunderstandings.
Some of your staff might have no problem speaking their mind, and other, like you said, other people be reserved. But that's the job as your management team, is to be able to, bring people to the common ground. And I'll just move on to the next section. All people have the same universal need to be treated with respect. The ability of caregivers to honor this need is based on their awareness of the interactions of three cultures: personal, healthcare delivery system, and the culture of the person. is being
Right.
cared for.
I like to think of, we all know what universal precautions are. We talk about trauma-based care, but we also, there's a universal need for respect. Like we should treat every individual with the same care and attention that we do with standard precautions or universal precautions. Like this person comes to us, and every one of us comes to us with our own challenges, fear. I mean, that's really, it's really a difficult time when somebody moves into assisted living, even if it's the most beautiful facility and even with the most wonderful staff, there's still a great deal of loss having to compartmentalize their life into a small room and decide what to have, or who. They've lost a lot of their loved ones. They may have lost their friends. So we have to talk, and we have to honor not their culture, where they're coming from, their personal culture. We have to honor the healthcare delivery system, the system that we work in. And there is a culture. There is a culture of each facility. And so we have to think about all of those things.
Okay, understanding culture. Healthcare providers need to understand the importance of culture, how it relates to people, their families, and their communities, and how it affects health, well-being, and attitudes towards elders.
Right, and people, I think that we're very, in America, we are a medical model, and doctor knows best, and that's part of our culture that we have raised up, and we go to the pharmacy for things, and the FDA rules what we take and what we don't take. So a lot of our structural coding of how we perceive healthcare comes from our environment. It's our culture, but not everyone that will come to us will have that same philosophy or the same upbringing, the same beliefs. There are people that believe in herbal medicine. There are people that believe in no medicine. There are people that there's just so many different things. We've all heard of people who don't believe in blood transfusions, and you can feel one way or another about that. But the one thing that the healthcare provider must do is to be accepting of their choices, because they don't really have a lot when they reach long-term care or assisted living. Their decisions and their choices are limited in their life. And the one thing that they can exercise, if they're able to, and they have the right to do that, is the choice of what they want done to their body. So we have to be compassionate towards that.
Mm-hmm.
Hard sometimes. It's hard when you're like, what do you mean you won't take that medicine? What do you mean? And it is very challenging. So I think that the best thing that we could say is the second thing underneath all of that is, when you create a relationship that's trusting with someone, you create a platform where you have a better chance of convincing that person to do what you think is good for their health if they trust you than if they don't. And when you understand their culture and you understand where they're coming from, you're more able to reach that place. You may not be successful, but you're never going to be successful if they don't trust you.
Right, that's a good point. Diversity. So diversity can include race, gender, culture, ethnicity, nationality, language, religion, age, sexual orientation, physical and mental ability, socioeconomic. It also includes differences in thinking style, lifestyle, political philosophy, parental status. And you touched on some of that earlier, talking about even just medical choices.
Right. I mean, so we have a very diverse population that we work with, and we have a very diverse staff of. So again, the culture of the healthcare facility is very important, in that you're going to have people of all different type of political affiliations, and there has to be some type of agree to disagree. To honor and respect people's choices,
right?
Anything. I think that I know that there is such a thing as a lavender ceiling, where people that are lesbian or gay, they don't get promoted as often, or they don't feel that, maybe they're accepted. They don't talk about, their loved ones in some type of healthcare like in the culture where they work. And most people that are married will say, my son, and that's just something that's natural. That's that human social intercourse that we do. But have we created a culture where somebody who is lesbian or gay can say, my loved one? And we have to think about things like that, because we work 8 hours a day, probably more, and we want to be able to be inclusive and have the people that we work with feel safe and valued and a part of that culture. So we have the culture of the people and the culture of the facility. So we got to tend to that very carefully. And,
yeah, this is reality. This is the reality.
Yes.
All these different, this different diversity.
Right.
So I think like what you mentioned about politics or some of those things, agree to disagree. You're not changing anybody's minds. You're not going to change anybody's opinions. But it's good to understand that they come from a place, and you need to understand that.
You know, I mean, because you might have like family members that don't believe in vaccinations and flu shots. You will, you know, and it might be the policy of the facility. So you really have to be balanced and be able to not show judgment in order to help people get the care that they need, or if not the care, the understanding of what your position is. I think that we live in a time where people have a lot of choices, but it also leads to a lot of people having a lot of opinions. And that is, in a healthcare facility, I think people need to know that the work there, we are there to help these people live the best life they can, while hopefully benefiting us and giving us our best life too. But we're really there to serve those people. So, and part of that is education. And when you go into any situation knowing about somebody, that ability to learn about them, that door has slammed closed. So you really always have to keep an open mind. So inclusion, we talked about inclusion. So we're moving beyond the resident. We know what we want to do for them, but the inclusive workplace allows the leaders to leverage their diverse talents and attributes to the entire workforce. So meaning, like when we talked about being inclusive of all the people that work there and empowering them the full potential of the employees, because when you have an amazing workforce that enjoy their job and can problem solve and work together collaboratively and cooperatively, everybody wins. But if everyone's fighting or rejecting or bullying each other for not being like them, everybody loses.
Yeah, and if you're an organization and you're not talking about these issues, I mean, they're there, they can cause conflict. So even just bringing it to light and celebrating the diversity that your company has, I think, you know, at your meeting, highlighting different religious events or different important things, contributions that are being made. I think it just brings awareness. So your organization has that obligation. You can't just rely on the caregiver to do it. It's more of a leadership.
Yeah, I think that your term awareness, I mean, when things aren't, when you're not aware of them, you tend to overlook them. So I think you're right. The first step is to bring the different issues, not even issues, the diversity to a level of awareness so people can begin to understand, well, that is different. And, you know, it's okay. And actually it's kind of fun or whatever. And I think that a facility that encourages that awareness is taking a very crucial first step in developing inclusion, tolerance, and everything else that goes with that. Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
And so the organization would value diversity with their residents and their staff, accepting and respecting differences. People do come from various backgrounds, which have different customs and thoughts. Ways of communicating, values and traditions vary accordingly.
Yes. I mean, it all seems so logical on paper, a little more difficult to practice. I think if you challenged anybody, any employee saying this is, they're like, oh yeah, that's what I do. But we have to be able to like be introspective and figure out, maybe that's not what I do. Do you know what I mean? I do go, maybe I do make those faces. Maybe I don't understand. Maybe it's very apparent I don't agree. And I think that those types of things that we can shape in ourselves and really think, why would I have the right to tell somebody else who's really not hurting one how to live their life? If we start to ask ourselves those questions, we become more diverse ourselves, which is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So.
There we go.
Okay, so the culture, what is a culture? I always like to think it's like what code. I can't imagine that if I wasn't born where I was at the time that I was, that I would be exactly the same if I was raised somewhere else. So I truly believe that a lot of the things that my upbringing, my education, the fact that I speak English, the fact that I don't know, like mashed potatoes, whatever, that is something that is my culture, because that is, that's what's familiar to me. Somebody else might be raised where they eat horse meat, and where I am raised in horse country, and I'm like, that's horrible. Not to that. So we have to check ourselves. The culture is what we have, how we have learned to negotiate our world. And there are certain rules that govern life. That's we make sense of things. So we have to know that we have a culture, we belong to a culture because that's what we've been exposed to. But that doesn't necessarily mean that our way is the right way. It's what we have been raised in, whether it's Italian or Irish or New York City, Queens, or the West Indies. That culture, if we probably were born there, we'd probably be doing what they were doing.
Yeah, like an abrasive New Yorker, for example, doesn't mean they don't mean well. They're just,
yes,
can be a louder way of saying things.
Yes. Right. But I think that when you open that space for people to be, when the opportunity, when you're really open to working cooperatively with somebody, when the opportunity arises where everyone can work together toward a common goal, it's very healing. I have been with people that were totally, maybe didn't even speak the same language as a nurse in ICU, but you're like, you're not really sure. But when somebody coded and we were all working together to bring that person back, it was so healing, and you realize that we were all really the same people, when it really counts. And I think that you just have to be open to that, experience. And when you're continually working, trying to understand, working together, and they're doing the same, you can build an amazing organization out of very diverse people. And really,
language barriers, yeah.
Language. So we think about language. I love language. Before I was a nurse, I was a speech therapist and language therapist. So I believe that language, to me, does the person understand? Is it their first language? If we talk about the elderly population, there's so many, it's just not simply you speak German, sometimes as some people grow older, even if they were fluent in English, if their first language was German, they may lapse in and out of that. So it could be frustrating to someone who said, well, they understood me yesterday. Why don't they understand me today? Because the aging brain may have them living almost in two spaces.
We had a resident, and she was with us for about 5 years, and she was a bank manager, very successful, and she completely stopped speaking English, went back to French completely. No English. I don't even think she understood it. Her daughter talked to her in French, and she didn't even, it was amazing. It's like she forgot all that side of things.
Right. So, and as far as there are so many, and I always think of the nuanced differences. like if you, all the little colloquialisms and the figures of speech and the way you speak in your native tongue, every second language, you never really get all those nuances. And even if you're very fluent and somebody's primary language is Spanish and they can speak English very fluently, they may not get like witty things. They may not get colloquialisms that the staff would be saying, like, you know, like people say that they're raised up and they'll say things that mean something else. Mm-hmm. And then they think that they've communicated very succinctly to this person and they've really not said anything at all in a way that they can understand. So the language barriers, I think that later on in the slide, we'll talk about some things that organizations can do. But nowadays with, usually there's always an interpreter. Like we try to, if they really needed an interpreter, find somebody. And that's the beauty of having a very diverse culture, healthcare employees, because if you have different cultures, you could say, hey, I have somebody that's French and you can speak French, could you help me? And
it makes a big difference. Yeah.
Yeah, you're not only helping the patient, but you're building a rapport with another person you work with. You know, every time you work as a team, you strengthen that bond and you're like, can you help me? Those are healing words. When you ask somebody and you're vulnerable and you say, can you help me? It changes the relationship and it's really nice. And so I do think that when we talk about languages, we talk about the actual language, the barriers to language of the elderly, such as expressive aphasia or receptive, where they sound like they're talking totally okay, but because the output is still good, but the input is all jumbled. So you're like telling them something and they're answering as if it makes sense, but they're not understanding what you're saying. That's a language barrier and complicated by the actual language itself. So that's something that we have to be very careful about. Even the fact that some cultures wouldn't really look women in the eye, or language is more than simple words too. It's body language, it's how you sit somewhere.
There's another point too to be made here is about staff. Sometimes if you have a bunch of staff that speak a certain language, they may communicate amongst themselves in their native tongue, and other staff think they're talking about them, and the residents hear the staff talking in a foreign tongue, and it can cause a lot of issues. I used to have to deal with some of that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And you know, the other thing is, like we talk about, I mean, just a discrimination of some residents against other residents that they would hear speak, because they were actually raised in a different era where they may not be accepting of that. So that's also an incredible challenge. I don't think you're going to change them, but you as a healthcare facility or a staff, you're challenged to try to come up with a solution for that, to mediate it somehow. And that's something when we get into the management, when you do have things like taco night or ethnic food night, or provide books in the library with different cultures, have a diverse working population to build a rapport with, all of these things can begin to heal some of those very difficult challenges.
Yeah. Yeah, we have actually a great idea you just mentioned, but a great idea would be to find out your staff or residents, and anybody that has something that's unusual or that's something that's different, maybe schedule, like if you're Polish, right? And
yeah,
maybe we just make Polish night and ask the resident or ask the staff member for their input on, like, how should we plan this? What it would be appropriate for this? What would be an appropriate meal that we can make? Or what about decorations? So they become like an advisor, and then we get to elevate them. Those are little things that, you know, people are always looking for ways and activities to throw in a facility, but that's a great one.
There's so many creative ideas. I live in Pittsburgh, and I think it's Duquesne University used to have like a little pop-up restaurant called Conflict Kitchen. And you would go and they would make an authentic, whatever, it was a from a country the United States was having a conflict with. And they would make this, whatever the meal would be, and wrapped in the paper were all kinds of wonderful things about that country. And it was an amazing, I think they shut it down because they had to build a, I don't know, maybe a Rite Aid or something, but it was just an amazing opportunity because it taught you, you got to share the food, but and there are so many things that you could do because as soon as you learn something, it changes your perspective. And if the thing that you learn is good about what, or positive, it changes your perspective in a positive way. So that's a neat idea. I like that.
You can have like a presentation like it during
Yeah.
lunch and talk about the locations and the culture of that particular place.
Yes.
And then if it's a caregiver, like we had this one lady and she was Polish and she didn't speak very much English. She was Polish, Russian. But I paid her to make Polish food because she was so good at it. So every once in a while we'd have a big Polish dinner, but then to explain to the residents this person's culture and the uniqueness of it, I think it adds a bond between staff and people bond over food, right?
Absolutely. And there used to be, I remember, and I don't know if they have them anymore, but they used to have travel log where you could go, and if someone traveled to a country at different nursing homes, not that they would just be somewhere, and they would show their pictures and talk about the country, and they'd have food, but it wasn't always at nursing homes. But I was thinking of that as well. Like you could travel from, your town and see somebody else's experience, and it made you want to go.
Mm-hmm. Well, and a lot of our residents are homebound. They'll never really be able to take those kind of trips. So
right.
It's a great way to expose them to culture and
yes. Yes.
Nationality refers to people living in a certain country, such as French. Now, I'm in a unique situation because I always fall into this. My name is Hawaiian, right? I'm not Hawaiian. I grew up in Hawaii, but Hawaii is a state, but it's also a nationality. So people would always ask me, "Oh, you're Hawaiian?" No, I'm not Hawaiian. Hawaiian is like a bloodline. It's like a nationality. But I did grow up in Hawaii. I think you can have French, but Muslim parents immigrated from Morocco.
Right.
So that's just my little story.
Yeah, I mean, no, it is really fascinating. I went to, where did I go? To Ireland to find my lineage. And here I found out, well, I could have figured out by the name, which was McCoy, son of. I just known, but they were from Scotland. Do you know the way over there? It was like kind of like a bad commercial. It was like, oh, okay. But it was very interesting. So that drives home the point, because you live in a certain place doesn't necessarily mean that you are that from birth, like a bloodline, exactly your story. So so you can have Muslims in France and all kinds of different nationalities in different geographic
cultures. Yeah.
Yes. So this is ethnocentrism, is a tendency to look at the world primarily from the perspective of one's own culture. And we're all guilty of this. I think that it takes mindful thought to try to extricate yourself from your own, this is the way it is, this is the way we've always done it. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. Those people, those countries, they don't make any sense. That's ethnocentrism. That's saying that if we're American, that this is the only way that we should do it. And that's not necessarily true. And we have to be aware that we do have that bias. And probably any other country has that bias against us. But we can't work through it and really, really serve the population we want to with any real regard unless we're aware of the possibility that we may be judging them or viewing their choices based on our own culture. And it's just really important for you to recognize that, and not you, but a healthcare worker needs to recognize that.
Yeah.
So socioeconomic status, of course, those are the people from the same race, same geographic location. Well, the people from these three places. They can share very different worldviews because it just depends. Like, so somebody that's living, we could all live in the same area, and some of us could be very affluent and some of us could be very poor, and we would see the world in a very different way. So we could have the common denominator of being from the same place, but we could be very diverse in the fact that we did not experience the same things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you can't just put them all in one group, right?
Yep.
Every individual is different.
Right. And I do think that it would be very easy. You see this a lot, and it's, I don't know if it's naive, but you see this a lot. Somebody that has a higher socioeconomic status and perhaps went to college or whatever, it's very easy for somebody to say, well, I would have just done this. But if you came from an impoverished background where you struggled for food or whatever, right down the road, that natural progression or that decision or that leap to just do this or that doesn't come naturally or easily to someone. And so we have to really check ourselves if we're judging someone and because something became easy to us or because we have opportunities. And opportunities aren't necessarily always financial. It could be the protective factors and support of a parent that helped you with your homework, not going to bed hungry. You know, it doesn't have to necessarily mean somebody paid for my college. It's all those things that contributed to a certain amount of success in anything. So we have to be careful about that. Mm-hmm. Judging somebody as lazy, not invested, didn't, you know, that kind of thing, because maybe we wouldn't have done it that way.
Right. Yeah. Walk a mile in their shoes, right?
Yep.
So sexual orientation, we just did a great training on that for the LGBTQ community. 3.5% of adults in the US identify this way, and 0.3 are transgender. So your population is going to be increasingly, it already has a makeup of this, they're just maybe not expressing themselves.
See, and I think if somebody said, well, we don't have anybody in our organization, I feel that that should just be a wake-up call.
Sure. And it's got to have a cross-section of America.
Right. And if you don't consistently have, if a facility does not have, I would say a visible population, and it's a large enough facility, they should be asking themselves some pointed questions. Why? Are the people not feeling safe? Do they have a reputation of not being open? Why don't, if it's a great facility, why don't these people either feel free and welcome to be who they want to be their whole life, or why don't we have a population? Because this is 3.5% of the adults, and so this should equate, there should be a sizable number in assisted living. And
3 in 100, right?
Yeah, that's right. So we should really be looking at that. And you know, you see what we're here, like we are working with this population to help them thrive for the remaining years of their life. And thriving to me is not hiding who you are or not feeling safe.
Right. Going back into, you know, keeping things secret and not being open.
Yeah, we're going back to the dark ages
for
them. Yes.
So this is definitely, you know, sensitive. Most people don't do these things. They don't share their orientation. It can, you know, they put themselves out there. Mm-hmm. Conversations about spouses, friends, and family help form a bond of mutual respect and trust. So that's normal to be able to talk about my wife. You were mentioning that earlier. Mm-hmm. So maybe somebody doesn't feel like they can share these stories about their personal life.
Well, I think this is a little bit tricky in fact, in healthcare, they tell you to serve the person and not share a lot. Like, you're not going in and talking about your political affiliations with or stressing these people out. You don't ever want to stress the residents out about anything. And so that would even say, my cat died. Like, so we really try as healthcare professionals to keep the conversation patient focused, resident focused, and not really bring a lot of those things. But that being said, in assisted living, they develop really nice, good rapport with people, and they're interested, and they feel the elderly people want to know about your life. So there is kind of like, you just can't say, well, no, that's not professional. That would be rejecting them in some way. So there has to be a balance. There has to be a balance of what the conversations are with the residents, but also among the staff. And if we are an inclusive and diverse environment, then this population, the LGBT population, must be able to talk about their loved ones, or why it would be, I think it would be an aversive environment. If they couldn't say, well, my partner and I went here and here, and to be able to share that with their coworkers. So even though I'm not sure some elderly would understand, that might be an issue, but that would be a personal thing for too much information or whatever. You probably wouldn't go in and start talking about the fight you had with your wife either. So there's definitely boundaries that must occur to be professionals, but we also have to include, are we being inclusive, and do the LGBT people, do they feel safe in saying they have a partner? Are they celebrated? Are they celebrated for their, anniversaries and stuff? So it's a delicate situation, but it's one that we have to address.
Or company parties.
Yes.
I mean,
exactly.
Do they feel comfortable bringing their spouse or loved one?
Absolutely, because I think that the paradigm of, I guess, of all good, of the way we want the world to be, is people to have work of value, that they feel value doing, that they enjoy going to work, that they get paid an equitable wage, and they can be who they really are. And so that's something we really have to think about. Are we, the first place to start, are we rejecting our peers, our coworkers, for their culture, their sexual, whatever it is? Are we ourselves rejecting? We need to. And
it could have started, let's just say one of your coworkers is LGBTQ, but when they first started working, there was a culture where people were joking about somebody who was gay. Now they're never going to feel comfortable telling you or bringing their spouse to a party, for example.
So one training would be like, what did we find funny? Even sometimes the things that you watch on TV, there has to be, I don't want to say Robert's Rules of Orders, but some type of boundaries at work, what you can talk about or not. Because things can be so off color or painful to people that you don't even know. And you have to be aware of some of the things that you're just used to talking about that may be offensive or hurtful. Other people that you care about, really, you should care about.
Yeah, we talked about that here: jokes, comments, threats, fear, harassment, hostile working environment or living environment.
Right.
Workplace issues for employees transitioning, the lavender ceiling, which you mentioned.
Right. I mean, the workplace issues primarily could be like, when I've been a nurse forever, and sometimes we had dressing rooms, you didn't wear your stuff out into, I don't think they do that anymore, bathrooms.
Yeah, sure.
Different things. I really feel that part of these have to be management, like being able to enforce things. And the other part is people being willing and wanting to be better human beings.
I think that, and like you mentioned, that if you don't have these type of people, then maybe you're just not aware of it and you're not promoting an environment that, because it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when you do, and do you have the right environment for the residents or the employees to thrive in the environment.
When you think about, if you would take what someone looked like, if you would just write the qualities of their character, and you would say this person shows up on time, doesn't call off, doesn't stick you with overtime, is very conscientious, knowledgeable, very few medication errors, whatever, very pleasant to work with, cleans up the kitchen after themselves, whatever. Mm-hmm. Like, you would pick that person every time. You're like, that's who I want to work with. but then you put, oh, it's lesbian, gay, Black, whatever. And then, so why would that be different? Like, we need to start looking at what kind of characters we want and valuing those above all other things, and to build our workforce, I believe, because we would take, it's a shame that people would judge or they would judge someone for anything like that. What you want to work or who you want to work with are the people with those qualities of character, really.
So we mentioned very diverse workforce.
Yes.
Mostly women. Healthcare is made up mostly of women.
Yes.
Black, Hispanic, and a lot of foreign-born people.
Yes.
So a lot of diversity there.
Yes. But then again, you have to think about if you have a primarily Hispanic workforce and not like maybe another smaller subset, are you as a facility addressing the concerns of mostly the Hispanic workers and neglecting the other ones? We have to always keep on, because really we want not only to have a culturally diverse staff, we want a culturally diverse clients and residents. You know, we want to be able to serve everyone and to fill everyone, because if anyone who's managing a facility, they want to have a reputation that's amazing, that all people want to come, because that's advertisement and marketing in and of itself. So if we're not having a lot of people of all this variety coming to our doors, we should really be asking why. Why not?
Yeah. Racism, 75% of non-white nurses, aides, CNAs report experiencing racism on the job. This racism is expressed towards frontline workers who represent different cultures. Where does racism come from? 56% race residents, 23% families, and 40% from fellow staff. Does that add up?
40%, that's awful.
It doesn't add up, does it?
No, I was, I was thinking.
Okay.
So unless it was different.
Maybe it's both. Maybe it's a poll and people answered both for some.
Yes. Yes. So you know what? That's tough. The staff is something we can do. The family. See, I think that in some regards, it contributes to a hostile work environment when people have to go into work, and despite all of their good work and trying to be conscientious and tolerant or whatever, they're getting it from people. That's where I think that's a delicate line, where perhaps a facility would have like an employee kind of work partners, or employee assistants that would help you kind of problem solve that. I think you'd use the example in some of our previous talks, like if you think, or if you're conscientious about something, if somebody is either mentally ill or cognitively impaired or just angry, they will hone in on the thing that you're self-conscious about and deliver it to you in every possible way it could be delivered, in like little arrows. It took me a long time to come to terms with the things I was sensitive, because if I didn't think that I was sensitive, as soon as somebody said, my face would burn. I'm like, oh, that's really a hard point for me. So we're trying to serve a population. If they have cognitive decline and they're calling us names, we have to be able to understand that and saying, you know, well, I'm still going to do the best care I have. Maybe switch out with somebody, talk about it as a team. Please, that I think is an administrative thing, like how much is too much. You know, we're struggling to find balance.
But it's good as an organization to be aware, you know, of that.
Like
and
when is it
have an avenue
abuse?
for somebody to come, like the employees feel like they have an open door that I can go, I can tell my management that I'm having these type of issues, that these feelings are, these residents or these coworkers are making me feel this way. There has to be this a way to address it.
I think I think you're right. I think that each one of these, I think you would need a blanket policy where, of course, with the staff not happening, but I do believe that there has to be an open door policy within the organization that if the residents and the families, that it would be dealt with mindfully on a case-by-case basis. It would be hard to have a blanket policy on that, like, because everyone is different. They're coming, what is the resolution? What kind of things are in place? But at least the door should be open to a conversation. And I'm a big believer when people feel like they've been heard, they begin to heal. So when you have like an employee assistance that's listening to you, it starts the healing conversation of where do we go from here?
Mm-hmm. We don't have that much more time, so we'll just.
Oh, okay. We'll speed through and we'll pick the good ones.
I'm just trying to keep it within the hour.
So let's talk about what, like, if we can just, the racism against staff, try to click through them and see if we.
Yeah, because we covered this here.
Yeah. Cultural competence, of course, is very simply being able to represent yourself validly and enjoy and allow somebody else to experience their culture without butting heads, and to provide good care to the right patient at the right time in their cultural framework. That's what cultural competence is in a nutshell. And it's important because of all the things that we said. We want to work, we want to feel valued, we have a shortage. After COVID-19, maybe people, it's really going to be maybe a new world order for healthcare. Mm-hmm. We have to be even more patient and caring. We may be after this, but it's still a work in progress. Okay.
Yeah, it's a big melting pot. Better understanding coworkers, residents, to reduce the number and frequency of resident complaints. I think that's an important thing to, as an administration, you want to try to reduce complaints, which could turn over your staff, turn over your residents. And like you mentioned, if we have a workforce shortage, then we have to truly value and try to make sure we understand what's important to each person.
Yeah, complaints are usually elevated to written complaints because they did not feel heard and that resolution was not prompt or timely. You know, when we have cultural competence, we're more likely to intervene much earlier before it comes to written formal complaints. Or I think that people complain when they don't feel heard. It escalates. So hopefully with cultural competence, we listen a little better.
I think it's just a few more here. So it's a never-ending process. I mean, it's evolving and keeps changing.
Yes.
So if you put some good policies in place, then you should be able to evolve with times.
Right.
5 key things: cultural wellness, be aware; cultural knowledge, gain knowledge; yes. Attain skills, seek encounters, which we talked about.
Yeah.
And then the desire, a true desire to improve and to learn.
Right. Well, if your culture has biases, yes. I mean, it does. You know, you can't help. You wouldn't be ascribing to a certain philosophy if you didn't inherently believe in it. So cultural, to know that you have it, to recognize that people are different and don't need to be like you, to try to understand what that residence culture would be. And sometimes it's multiple. They may be American and born in Bolivia, you know, so you're crossing over some things. Try not to impose your own cultural norms or values onto the resident, whether it's medicine, the way you provide care. You know, a lot of it, I have to say, about imposing your own values. We bathe a lot in America, and you know, and we value the brevity of like time. So we don't really honor the residents' modesty needs. Sometimes it's like, it's shower day, let's go. That
especially if you have to do a bunch of them and you don't have a lot of
right.
time.
You're like, I gotta get 4 of you done before 11. Let's go. And so
right.
That's the type of thing you're thinking, I'm just doing my job. But no, that's where you might have to pause. Every time you say, it's just my job, you should probably pause right there and think about, where's my bias here? And am I really mindful? Am I really addressing this?
Respectful. Yeah.
Right.
Different religious beliefs
Right.
can lead to misunderstandings.
Right.
End of life, we'll just touch on a couple of these because I think it's important.
Right.
End of life wishes can vary among racial and ethnic groups.
Right.
Each person's experience, it can ease each person's experience with dying, enhance comfort among families.
Yes. Yeah, and the rituals, I think, of dying. I think that, people rarely die in a peaceful place. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But in healthcare, it's sometimes very chaotic, stressed, noisy. And it's hard to create a space for people to have their rituals for their loved ones. And if there's anything that we could do, we should do.
Yeah, and educate on each person, each
Right.
resident's needs. Right. So assimilation, basically, I mean, it's everybody's brought into this world, right? I mean, into this environment. Other residents from different cultures, other employees from different cultures, management from different cultures, and we're all assimilating into this assisted living culture, which hopefully has a diverse program. And I think that's really the point.
Yeah, me too.
Privacy, you touched on that. Different religions and different cultures have different privacy.
Yes.
I think some of these are repeating here. Tips: keep it simple, avoid slang, speak slowly but not patronizing, practice active listening, take turns talking, write things down, avoid closed questions, be careful with humor, and be supportive. Yeah,
to be careful with humor, like what you think is loud or boisterous or funny could be really just annoying and offensive to people. The best you could do is to keep it simple, to be mindful, patient, and kind, and allow them to set the pace of the conversation when possible.
Nope. I think we'll skip this part here. Let's just go on. What do we have here? The benefits of benefits.
Yeah. So, I mean, we all know that we have to recognize and address diversity and celebrate not only the residents, but the employees' cultural heritage and beliefs. Just makes us all better. And it just can't just be wishful thinking. There should be structured staff training, kind of like this one, I guess, to build diverse cultural awareness and plant seeds to think there is a different way of being. And then we talked about the things about having special food nights, or maybe like a travelogue series, or hiring a speaker that talks about different things. And at the end of the day, that this will expand their life and maybe make them interested in something other than what they know.
I mean, if you're in management and you really get to know your employees and maybe take it upon yourself to get to know them and learn something interesting about their culture or something that's important to them. And then at your meeting, maybe highlight it and say, this is something that you didn't know about, Sue here, but if it's okay with them, and, celebrate it. And it's a way of building awareness.
Because there's really no one that I've ever met as a mental health nurse that was unhappy with the opportunity to talk about themselves in a meaningful way. I've never met anyone that didn't want to share something. That's human connection at its finest. And the elderly are absolutely no different.
Yeah. So a plan of action, and then we're done. So development of more appropriate care plans. So you could incorporate some of this cultural competency into a care plan. Right? When you're doing your admission, you're finding out, you're talking to the family, you're finding out what the resident needs, likes, dislikes, add in there, are there any ways that you can improve their care plan?
Yes, right. Because, yeah, and I think that when it's written, because hopefully all the staff have access to that. And if they can't come up with it on their own, there should be some written guideline like, hey, this is the way it would be, or they really like it draped on this, or even some cultures have altars or, you know, places to pray, that not to disturb that. Things that you might not think about, but you need to think about. And so your plan would help you organize all that information into a user-friendly way that anybody that's working with that patient could look at and understand.
Take surveys, ask questions, get feedback, development of procedures to accommodate residents. We talked about that. Increased effectiveness of work. It will increase the effectiveness. That should have been the benefits. And it will help you increase the compliance with federal and state requirements, of course, discrimination, those type of issues you might run into.
Absolutely.
Well, I think we did it. We may be 3 minutes over. I'm not going to hold it against you. Please don't hold it against us. Diane, thank you so much for your time. And is there anything else, or is that?
No, that's it. Thank you so much.
Okay.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.